Good morning. Welcome to Kenya News Update today. In a landmark ruling that sends shockwaves through Kenya's real estate and anti-corruption landscape, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission has scored a major victory. The EACC has successfully recovered prime public land valued at a staggering 50 million Kenyan shillings along the busy Kangundo Road corridor in Machakos town. This recovery, following a decisive court ruling, nullifies the land's previous unlawful allocation to private developers. But this story is about much more than just a plot of land. It's a case study in the systemic theft of public resources, the long and arduous fight for accountability, and the critical question facing Kenya today: is this a turning point in the war against graft, or just another isolated victory in a seemingly endless battle? I'm your host, and over the next 12 minutes, we will dive deep into the details of this case, explore its broader implications, and debate what it truly means for the future of Kenya's public assets. We'll examine the mechanics of the theft, the EACC's strategy for recovery, and the fierce debate surrounding the Commission's effectiveness. We have a panel of perspectives lined up, from anti-corruption advocates to legal experts and voices questioning the pace of progress. First, let's ground ourselves in the facts of this specific recovery. The land in question isn't some remote parcel. We're talking about 0.79 acres of prime, commercially viable real estate situated directly along Kangundo Road, a major and perpetually busy transportation artery feeding into Nairobi. This location alone dictates its immense value. The EACC's investigation, which culminated in this court victory, established a clear pattern: the parcels were unlawfully and irregularly allocated to private individuals. The exact method likely involved collusion between unscrupulous officials and well-connected private developers, effectively transferring a public asset meant for the benefit of all Kenyans into private hands for personal profit. The valuation of 50 million shillings underscores what was stolen. But to understand the full scale, we need to contextualize this figure. Let's bring up our first visual. This 50 million shilling recovery is significant, but it exists within a much larger financial landscape of graft. For perspective, consider other major land recovery cases pursued by the EACC. In one high-profile case in Mombasa, the Commission is targeting properties valued at over 363 million shillings. In another in Nairobi, a prime plot is estimated to be worth 60 million shillings. The 50 million from Kangundo Road is a substantial piece, but it is part of a mosaic of stolen public wealth that likely runs into the tens of billions. The visual clearly shows the 50 million shillings in the context of these other massive figures. It's not an outlier. It's a representative sample of a widespread problem. Now, the successful recovery of this land is being hailed as a win by the EACC and anti-corruption campaigners. But how did they do it? The path to recovery is rarely straightforward. It typically begins with a tip-off or a proactive audit by the Commission. Investigators then embark on a forensic journey, tracing title deeds, examining minutes of allocation committees, and interviewing officials. The goal is to build an airtight legal case that proves the transaction violated public procurement laws, land regulations, or was done without proper public interest justification. In this Kangundo Road case, the Commission presented evidence that convinced the court to nullify the allocation. This legal strategy is crucial. A court order provides the final, enforceable authority to repossess the land. Without it, the EACC's efforts could be stalled indefinitely by appeals and legal technicalities. The Commission's CEO has emphasized that such recoveries are a key pillar of their strategy, not just punishing individuals, but actively returning stolen assets to the public. This is what they call asset recovery, and it's meant to have a tangible, positive impact on national development. However, this perspective is not without its critics. While celebrating this victory, we must also engage with a more skeptical viewpoint. Some analysts and members of the public argue that cases like this, while positive, are merely scratching the surface. They point out that for every 50 million shilling plot recovered, dozens more may have been stolen without any investigation. The process is often painstakingly slow, taking years to wind through Kenya's congested court system. During this time, the land may have been developed, sold, or used as collateral, complicating recovery further. Critics also question whether the real masterminds behind these schemes, the powerful individuals who orchestrate the allocations, ever truly face consequences. Are we only seeing the recovery of assets, while the architects of the theft remain insulated by their influence and wealth? This leads to a fundamental debate about the EACC's role and effectiveness. Is the Commission a formidable watchdog, or is it constrained by political interference and limited resources? Let's hear from our first guest, a representative from Transparency International Kenya. Welcome. Thank you for having me. This recovery is undoubtedly a step in the right direction. It demonstrates that with diligent investigation and a cooperative judiciary, public assets can be reclaimed. The 50 million shillings is not just a number. It represents potential public utilities, affordable housing, or infrastructure that can now benefit the community of Machakos. It sends a deterrent message that illicitly acquired wealth is not safe. However, our concern remains the systemic nature of the problem. Land grabbing is a historical and deeply entrenched issue in Kenya. To move the needle, we need more than case-by-case victories. We need comprehensive land registry digitization to prevent forgery, mandatory public disclosure of all large-scale land transactions, and much faster adjudication of corruption cases. The EACC must be fully funded and protected from political manipulation to pursue cases without fear or favor, regardless of who is involved. The focus must shift from just recovering assets to also ensuring high-level convictions that break the cycle of impunity. Thank you. That's a powerful point about systemic change versus individual cases. Now, let's consider another angle, the legal and bureaucratic hurdles. We're joined by a constitutional lawyer who has followed land fraud cases. Welcome. From a legal standpoint, this recovery highlights both the strengths and weaknesses of our system. The court's willingness to nullify the allocation based on procedural irregularities and lack of public interest is a positive application of the law. It affirms that public land is held in trust for the people and cannot be alienated without strict adherence to the law. The legal framework, including the Constitution and various land acts, is actually quite robust on paper. The challenge is execution. The process is adversarial and technical. Defendants employ top-tier lawyers who can delay proceedings for years. Furthermore, proving unlawful allocation often requires accessing old, poorly kept records or getting testimony from officials who may be reluctant or complicit. The EACC's success here required meticulous evidence gathering, but for every successful case, many others stagnate. There's also the issue of what happens after recovery. The land is now back in public hands, but which public entity? Who manages it? Is there a clear plan to ensure it is used for genuine public benefit, or could it languish or even be reallocated improperly down the line? The legal victory is only the first step. Transparent and accountable post-recovery management is the critical second step that often gets less attention. An excellent point about the life cycle of a recovered asset. It's not the end of the story. Now, let's pivot to the human impact. What does the loss and recovery of such land mean for ordinary Kenyans? When public land is stolen, it's not a victimless crime. That half-acre along Kangundo Road could have been a public market, a bus park to ease the notorious traffic, a health clinic, or a public green space. Its privatization denies the community these services and contributes to urban planning chaos. The 50 million shillings represents lost opportunity. Conversely, its recovery offers a chance to rectify that. But this requires proactive and inclusive public participation in deciding the land's future use. The community of Machakos should have a say. Will it be sold to fund other projects or developed directly for public use? This is where the conversation must go next. To illustrate the scale of the challenge beyond this single case, let's look at another visual. This timeline shows the progression of a typical, complex land recovery case, from the initial tip-off to the final court order. As you can see, the process is not quick. It involves multiple time-consuming phases: the preliminary inquiry, the full investigation, the preparation of legal filings, the court hearings which face adjournments, and finally the judgment. This entire journey can take, on average, 3 to 5 years, sometimes longer. During this time, legal costs mount, witnesses may become unavailable, and public interest can wane. This timeline contextualizes why recoveries can seem slow and why the EACC might have many cases in the pipeline with few visible results at any given time. It's a marathon, not a sprint. This slowness feeds public frustration and skepticism, which brings us to our final guest, a political economist who is critical of the current anti-corruption approach. Welcome. Thank you. We cannot applaud the system for occasionally working as it should. The recovery of 50 million shillings is a drop in the ocean compared to the billions of shillings in public land that has been illicitly acquired over decades. My primary critique is that the focus on technical legal recovery does little to address the political economy of corruption. Land is a tool of political patronage in Kenya. Allocating plots to allies, businessmen, and community leaders is a way to build and maintain political networks. Until we disrupt the economic and political incentives for grand corruption, the EACC will simply be playing whack-a-mole. We need to ask tougher questions. Who were the private individuals who received this land? What political or bureaucratic connections did they have? Are they facing any other consequences beyond losing the asset? Furthermore, the valuation of public land often ignores its future speculative value, meaning the public may be recovering less than the ultimate profit the thief would have made. We need a paradigm shift that includes much heavier punitive fines, seizure of other assets from the beneficiaries, and real political consequences for the officials who sign off on these deals. The narrative of recovery can sometimes let the enablers off the hook, a provocative and necessary critique. It raises the stakes from asset return to systemic accountability. So, where does this leave us? We have a concrete victory, 50 million shillings worth of land returned to the public. We have a committed anti-corruption body pointing to this as evidence of progress. We have legal experts acknowledging the robust framework but citing implementation delays. We have civil society demanding faster, broader systemic reforms. And we have analysts arguing that the entire approach is inadequate without tackling the root political incentives. This debate reflects the complex reality of fighting corruption in Kenya. It is multifaceted. The EACC's work is essential, but it cannot be the only front. The judiciary must continue to uphold the law without undue delay. The legislature must ensure laws are strong and resources are adequate. The executive must demonstrate political will by not interfering and by acting on the findings of investigations that touch on powerful figures. And the public must remain vigilant, demanding transparency in how recovered assets like this Kangundo road plot are ultimately utilized. The true test of this recovery will be what is built on that 0.79 acres. Will it be a monument to renewed public trust, or will it become a symbol of a cycle yet to be broken? The story of this land is a microcosm of Kenya's broader struggle. It shows that victories are possible, but they are hard-fought and often incomplete. The 50 million shillings is back in the public coffers, but the system that allowed it to be stolen remains under repair. The debate will and should continue. For now, the people of Machakos, and indeed all Kenyans, have one small piece of their national heritage returned. The question for all of us is, what will we do with it? Thank you for joining this deep dive analysis. We will continue to follow this and other stories of accountability. Subscribe to Kenya News Update today for more in-depth reporting on the issues that shape our nation.